He's got a lot to say this evening.
A dangerous escalation in the war that's now on day one.
For those who are new, my name is Joe Pica, and I'm serving as president of the Sussex Preservation Coalition, SPC for short. A lot of people were gathered out in the hallway this evening looking at our map. And if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, you might want to wander up at the end of the meeting. The map depicts ignore the man over there. I feel like the Wizard of Oz. Ignore the man over there behind the curtain. It depicts the developments that are in the development pipeline, which means that they have been approved or they are in the process of consideration. And I do not have data to tell me what the percentage of proposed developments ends up being approved, but I would bet that it's quite high, right? I think all of us would say that. And so even those that are not yet confirmed are ones that are highly likely. And we've been tracking those thanks to the help of Allison White, and will continue to do so. They are not evenly distributed throughout the county. We have also put up here the council districts. And so if you're curious what council district your home is in, you can always check this map. There is an election this November, but in addition, it also tells us where is most of the development occurring. And you'll notice there's one in this councilmanic district. It's a large district. There's one development. 40% of all of the developments are occurring in District 5, which is one of the districts that has an election this year. So there are two districts where there are elections, District 5 and District 4, right? And we are currently in District 3, which is Jane Grunebaum's district, and Jane just walked in the door and is here with us this evening. Welcome, Jane. So, but that's not our main story tonight, but I just want to encourage you, if you get a chance, take a look at the map. It's revealing. Here's our agenda for this evening. We're going to have a couple of updates that I can give you on things that have been percolating recently. Steve Sinclair is going to come up and talk to us about the Forest Preservation Ordinance, which is still pending. Originally, I was going to also talk about a couple of other developments that are going on, but in fact, I think we want to spend most of our time on wetlands this evening, and we have two speakers with us this evening about wetlands. One has arrived and one has already told me he's going to be a little bit late this evening, so I'll be very nervous until he shows up. But I believe that he will as well. Let me first talk just a couple of minutes about the 4 ordinances that have been introduced in the county council. They were the product of the work of the Land Use Reform Working Group, which was put together by council instead of a moratorium. And so at the beginning of 2025, a lot of pressure was put upon the council to do something about development and about overdevelopment and about overcrowding of roads, schools, doctors' waiting offices. And we have a common list that we go through. And one of those proposals was a moratorium. There wasn't sufficient support to go in that direction immediately. And in lieu of that, council put together the Land Use Reform Working Group, which met for how many months? 5, maybe longer. Felt like forever. Say 2 of the members of that working group are here tonight. The designated environmental representatives on that working group. And that group ended up in early September approving 20 recommendations. It's questionable whether all of those were the product of the work of the working group or if they were the product of the consultants or staff. But in any event, there are 20 recommendations that were sent forward to County Council. 4 of those have been translated into ordinances that were introduced and are under consideration. And in fact, 2 of them were approved today. One of them dealt with the Sussex County rental program, which has been in effect for 7, 8 years and has had only 1 project developed under it, with a second one that hasn't broken ground but is kind of approved and kind of waiting. So it hasn't been a huge success. Question is, how do we make changes to make it work, make it grow? That was approved today. Those changes were adopted. The second one dealt with the much-loved 99.9C, which is a provision in the ordinances. There's a list of requirements that developers must meet, subdivision developers must meet, before they can proceed with their proposal. There were modest changes made, let me put it that way, to what is already on the books. They did not embrace most of the suggestions that SPC had put forward. And our central, or I would say our most prominent recommendation dealt with capacity, that there should be explicit attention given to the capacity of infrastructure and essential services, roads, schools, and emergency services in the process of considering development proposals. That was not even discussed in public. And so in any event, it wasn't adopted. There are 2 other ordinances that I would describe as being in limbo. They have had public hearings at both the level of the Planning and Zoning Commission and the level of Sussex County Council, but they have not moved forward for a discussion and a vote, which suggests that there are not 3 votes supporting it. Behind the scenes, usually they count noses and figure out, well, do we have a majority for this? Does it have a chance of passing before it actually comes up on the agenda? One deals with clusters, as they're called, which is a way to consolidate development in rural areas, leaving part of the land open, but consolidating most of the development on smaller plots. And the second one deals with open space and the protection of open space. SPC believes that both of those are important ordinances that would make us move forward, help us move forward, and the goals that we have on protecting natural resources and redirecting growth away from rural areas, that they would halt sprawl. Nothing's happened, and we don't know if anything will happen. We did respond, just to alert you, we responded to some of the arguments that came forward during the public hearings on these that were more legalistic. One of them as especially important for farmers. They argue that if you interfere with the economic value of their property, that is the equivalent of a taking if there's the possibility that the value of their land would decline. We have filed a very long argument in rebuttal to that and arguing that their understanding of an unconstitutional taking is incorrect and that there's no evidence that's been provided about how these ordinances would be damaging, how much damage might they create, and why in the record. And so we've tried to kind of take on some of the major arguments opposed. So we work at a number of levels. And so we had good representation at today's meeting, and we have, we monitor what's been going on with these ordinances. There is a fifth ordinance that has been introduced as well, and that is what Steve is going to talk about today, which is the Forest Preservation Ordinance. So we have two speakers with us here tonight. One is from DNREC, Olivia Allred, and the second one is from the Delaware Nature Society, Mark Nardone, and Mark has arrived, so I will stop sweating about that. And I thought as a prelude to discussing, how do I move up and down? Pam, on this slide, how do I move down to the video? That's the problem. Getting down to the link. This isn't letting me move down the screen. Technical problem, technical glitch. We have had a good working relationship with Chris Driscoll of Driscoll Drones, and you may have seen some of his work. Yep. And this is a video that he created for Earth Day this year, and we thought it would be appropriate intro. So it's not showing. See, that's lovely. Look at this. Very impressive. See, we tried to get fancy, right? And this is what happens when you try to get fancy. Oh my goodness, she's out of everything now. We can leave it. No. It's a picture of Holland, I think, when you were there, right? The Netherlands. Yes. Maybe. Chris Driscoll really is an ally, and his images say an enormous amount. So tonight's program is really about what's happening in the area of forest preservation and what's happening in the area of wetlands protection, because there are opportunities to move forward. Sussex has a very rich natural resource heritage. It gets poorer by the year. Every year, it becomes poorer. And that's what people are really trying to stop with the ordinance and with the bill that we're going to be talking about tonight. So we're still going to start with Steve, who's going to talk us about the Forest Preservation Ordinance. Steve?
Thank you, Joe. Which is is it that button?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't think I need to talk about the rationale and the reason behind forest preservation ordinance. We just saw a great video that describes that. One of the things that we need to a little historical perspective here is in 2022, 2023, a group of like-minded citizens got together to talk about what was happening in Sussex County, and one of their principal concerns was the loss of forest cover in Sussex County, and that became one of the main themes of the Sussex Preservation Coalition. So you'd think, well, 3 years, it's taken 3 years to get an ordinance before the county council. Some people might think that that's too long a time, but someone that worked in state government for 40 years, I would say 3 years is a definite success going forward. Joe talked a little bit about the Land Use Reform Working Group and the fact that they came up with a number of recommendations. There were really only two that had kind of an environmental theme to them, and number 13 talked about forest preservation. And the ordinance really, it kind of ties directly into that. It has a new definition of forests. It talks about mitigation. Should forests be removed? It sets some goals, some standards of how much forest should be maintained on a development. And it talks about additional tree planting and forest afforestation. The proposed ordinance isn't perfect. Nothing is. But it is definitely a step in the right direction. And I think SPC's feeling on this is that, you know, we could have gone forward with, you know, multitude of proposed changes, but at the same time, we didn't want to just have it be dead in its tracks. So our thought was, let's see if we can really focus on some real key points and try to make some changes there. And then similar to 99C and open space, which we testified to several years ago and didn't get what we wanted. but they came back before the council and we made a few more inroads in that area. I think our thought is with forest preservation, let's do the same thing. Let's get something on the books because right now there's nothing. Let's get something on the books and then we can work from there to move forward. So it went before planning and zoning last week, and several of us testified on it. There was several developers that also testified on it. There was actually some agreement, believe it or not, with both of the development community and the environmental community on some changes, as well as some disagreements. Our next step is going before County Council on July 14th. It has several key requirements, as I mentioned, that are very similar to what was in the recommendation from the working group. Talks about retention limits, and those are for 30% in growth areas and 50% in rural areas. So let's say, we'll use 100 acres as an example, pretty easy. So you've got a parcel of land that has 100 acres of forest in the growth area. You've got to conserve at least 30 of those acres. In the rural areas, you have to conserve 50% of 50 of those acres. So that means we're not going to be able to save it all. Now the developer in their kind heart may choose to conserve more than what is required, but those are what the standards are. There's a requirement to do a forest stand delineation, which is an inventory. You go in and you inventory the existing forest, determine what the species composition is, the age class, the health condition. Are there any other intrinsic values associated with those stands? And hopefully the developer and or his planner will identify these forests are critical, these forests perhaps aren't. So if I'm not going to save it all, these are the ones that have higher values that might be associated with a wetland or wildlife habitat. Those would be conserved. There's a mitigation ratios. We'll get into that in a minute, meaning that if they do remove more than the forest retention limits, they're required to replant. But as I've said many times, both in this forum and others, we can't plant ourselves out of our dilemma. You just cannot replace forests with seedlings, with trees. You need to conserve what is there and all those values that those forests are providing. And then applicability. As I said, we really support this with some modifications. Some of the key provisions that we support, we brought these up back in the perimeter buffers recommendations, that they should be talking about recognized standards and ANSI A300 standards for both tree planting and tree protection. They've been around for 30 years. They should have been in the perimeter buffer ordinance when it was being proposed. We recommended that. It wasn't taken up, but at least they got some advice, took advice from Kyle Hoyt, the Delaware State Forester, and he brought that forward, and that's in the provision, which is great. As I mentioned before, they're requiring this forest stand delineation. This is something that the Maryland Conservation Act in Maryland requires. Many other jurisdictions require that, not all forests are equal. You need to know what is there. Just like a store clerk inventories their produce and their wares, a forester or a natural resource professional goes in and evaluates and analyzes what's currently on site and makes a determination of what's valuable and what isn't. So that's great. The minimum protection standards, there's timing associated in bonds and guarantees that has to take place prior to the development occurring and versus afterwards, which is great. And it does include some additional planting requirements that we're trying to push toward increasing urban tree canopy in these developments. And when I testified at planning and zoning, and I said, I can't believe that a developer is not required to plant one tree on a homeowner's property. And one of the planning and zoning person said, well, isn't that the responsibility of the homeowner? And I'm like, we've lost 40,000 acres of forest land in Sussex County. Why can't we start requiring that trees get planted, and a tree in someone's yard is increasing urban tree canopy and is a benefit not only to the homeowners, but all residents in Sussex County. So that's something we're going to be working on. So one of the modifications that we recommended, and so this is something that Jill's been pushing on a lot of the ordinances, is a purpose statement. So you have these typical ordinances started with a whereas, but there's really no description of why is this ordinance in place? What is it? What is the problem it's trying to solve, and how is it going to go about solving them? And that's what we'd like to see as a purpose statement. And because if you look in the comp plan, if you look in current ordinances, really trees right now are just thought of as screening. They talk nothing about all those natural resource values that trees and forests and the natural environment provides. And we feel that why not under a tree preservation or a forest preservation ordinance should we at least have a purpose statement that talks about why these are important. We've talked about revising the forest definition. Currently the definition, and Kyle Hoyt, the state forester, told me that they specifically made it broad to be able to encompass everything. But we're suggesting that it requires at least the forest be 50 feet wide, because, you know, a forest any narrower than that, you really, not only are you creating edge effects and it's not sustainable over time, but it really is not providing a lot of those natural resource benefits, whether it's habitat, connectivity, corridors, encroachment, and what have you. We also wanted to put a number value on the minimum number of trees per acre that it would be, which would be 100 trees per acre, which is what they're using in their mitigation standards for tree planting, is 100 trees per acre. So that seemed like a fairly a reasonable thing. Another thing is, in the current proposal, they talk, the forest stand delineation is not only an inventory, but also the plan. And we didn't feel that that put enough emphasis on actually creating a plan. So we're suggesting that the forest delineation definition be refined strictly to talk about the inventory, and then there be a requirement for a forest preservation and maintenance plan. Because once these forests are preserved, you just don't leave them alone. You know, they just don't stay there on their own. Homeowner associations over time are going to be responsible for maintaining these. You've got issues related to invasive plants, hazard tree removal, forest health issues. So the HOAs and the developers need to develop a plan on, number one, of the acres that they're going to retain. Why are they retaining them? What are those intrinsic values in those forests that are better than others that should be retained? And then how are you going to manage those over time and have it as a document in place, similar to what we have in the resource buffer ordinance that requires a resource management plan for resource buffers. And actually the perimeter buffers have a management plan requirement as well. So it makes sense to do that here. We want to modify the mitigation procedures. Currently, it pretty much allows you to ignore the preservation ordinance. You know, if we really want to preserve forests, then let's do that. So our recommendation, SBC's recommendation, is that it's only under mitigating circumstances where a developer can cut more than the retention requirements of 30 or 50%. And an example might be they need to get some kind of a utility corridor into the property, and the only way to do that is to go through that forest stand. Well, then we would allow that. But just because the forest is not where they want it to be, which is often the case, they're going to remove that and plant it somewhere else because they want to put their houses or stormwater pond there. To us, that's not the way to go. And then finally, add an overall landscape plan requirement. That's something that Jeff Siemens, who's is a member of SBC and a landscape architect, and I could not believe that Sussex County does not require a landscape plan for developments. Any other jurisdiction at the state, regional, community level in these large-scale developments requires a detailed landscape plan for the entire property that would talk about landscaping entrances along roads, around clubhouses, common areas for shade trees. And some developers provide this on their own, but it's not a requirement of the county, and we're suggesting that and hoping that that will increase urban tree canopy inclusion in the end. So that's it. It's a work in progress. We have our next bout with county council. We hope Jane will be able to advocate for some of these issues with other of the council members. And we're also looking for folks to be involved in forest preservation, attending the meetings. And I think there's gonna talk about a sign-up sheet. And as an added incentive, I'm gonna take folks that sign up for that on a tree walk to McCabe Reserve. So, thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Steve did a wonderful, wonderful job, and when he presented at Planning and Zoning, and I think you got a sense of that. And there's nobody whose enthusiasm and commitment, other than maybe Jane's, to forests and trees is greater than Steve's. A question.
In the video that you showed, there was some mention made of compared to other neighboring jurisdictions, we're so much worse here. What other neighboring jurisdictions was that referring to?
Steve, other neighboring jurisdictions? And we're worse off? Do you have any idea of which ones in particular? We are the only county that doesn't have a tree preservation in the Mid-Atlantic. Oh, and in Delaware, they have one as well. One more question.
What in this ordinance would prevent the current owner of the land from clearing that land before he sells to a developer?
Well, the Delaware Forest Service has a tree, maybe Chris, you might know the specific terms, but they have a permit required for silvicultural practices. So if you clear up beyond a certain number of acres, you have to get approval from the Delaware Forest Service for silvicultural operations, and then DNREC has permitting requiring as far as for development purposes. So there's two different, it used to be they were kind of combined. Now they've separated those out. And talking with Kyle Hoyt, he feels that they've got a better handle on legitimate silvicultural practices where landowners are managing their land for forest versus a landowner that's cutting it and then selling it to developer. Plus, I believe the county now has a look back, a 5-year look back on developments on perimeter buffers. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to have to move on. Do you have to do a transition? Why don't you come on up while I'm introducing Olivia. So we have, as I said earlier, 2 speakers to speak to the other initiative that is wending its way through the system, in this case through Dover. And this deals with wetlands. And we thought that Olivia Allred would be able to give us kind of an overall background on wetlands. And she works in DNREC. She is a Harbison native who took a class on environmental science as a high school freshman and discovered her great enthusiasm and a lifetime commitment, possibly a lifetime commitment. She's early in her lifetime. She later interned at Trap Pond State Park while she was a student at the University of Delaware, and then she's been with DNREC for 10 years. And her responsibilities have grown. Among other things, she's coordinated 2 conferences that drew participants from throughout the Mid-Atlantic on wetlands in 2024 and 2026. So Olivia, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Okay, I'm a hand talker, so microphone I use in professional settings, but it makes me a little nervous. So, hi everybody, Olivia Allred. Thank you for the introduction. I'm really, really excited to be here tonight on a personal level and a professional level because I've been looking to infiltrate this group for some time. And I hadn't set time aside, and this was just really serendipitous occasion for me to come out and talk to you guys. So I work in the Wetland Monitoring and Assessment Program. That is a mouthful. And I'm within the Division of Watershed Stewardship, another mouthful. So I'll give you a little background about who I am, my program, all the good stuff. But I really wanted to touch upon just what wetlands are, a little bit of background on the habitats that we have, as well as why they are important, right? Because groups like you are helpful for my job, but also helpful for the wetlands to get basic information out there, right? Because there's one of me, there might be 100 of you, and we really want to partner more with landowners as a program. Little background on me, I am a Delaware native. I went to Cape Henlopen High School, so I'm very familiar with this area. I live off of Route 24 on Love Creek, so I think wetlands are pretty much tried and true in my blood. And I've been with Denrick, this is my 10th year. I'm a lifer, so I think I'll be around, hopefully, for a long time. I'm gonna do a little pop quiz first, because that is what I like to do. Can anyone tell me what DENREC stands for? Someone in this room can. You cannot answer. You cannot answer. Anybody want to give it a shot? It's okay if you get it wrong. Yes. Ooh, so close. So close. Anybody else? Anybody else? Oh, yes. Environmental control, right? So it's really, like I said, a total mouthful. DENREC and then Division of Watershed Stewardship, Wetland Monitoring and Assessment Program. You know, there's a lot of acronyms and all sorts of things, but I just wanted to give you a snapshot of how we are organized. The governor appoints our secretary. Gregory Patterson is our secretary. We do like him a lot. And those are all the different divisions that we have. So some people are more familiar with Fish and Wildlife, Parks and Recreation. I am in one of the smaller divisions in Watershed Stewardship. There's about 50 of us right now, versus state parks, you know, with their seasonals, they get up to 1,500 or 1,600 staff members. So I put a couple key words just to get us thinking about what we do as a department, but also kind of relating that back to wetlands. We do all of those key words as well. So everything under the sun, and we'll get into what my program likes to do, but that's DENREC in a nutshell, because I think we kind of have an identity crisis, right? I'm in the grocery store a lot, and people are like, are you a park ranger? Not quite. So I just like to give us a little bit of an identity, because it's really hard to navigate who does what, especially in state government, and that's all I'll say on that. I think it's a little bit, let me adjust the screen here. That's better. Okay, my program. We are tiny. There are 3 of us. It is 2 Allisons and myself, and we're going to stay that way. We don't think we'll grow anymore. We have been in DENREC for about 22 years, so fairly new, but there's lots of reasons that our program was created. And you'll learn when we talk about wetlands why in terms of land area. And our main goal is to track the health and acreage of wetlands across Delaware. That is our main job. We are not the permit department. If you have gripes, confessions, complaints, I'm here to listen. I totally understand when it comes to permitting, because our projects also sit in the queue of many years to get things done. And I think we can answer questions and chit chat about that as well. But that is our main job overall. Got it. Research, we do a lot of restoration, stabilization, conservation, all the Ations, as I call them. So this can be a little bit science heavy in terms of data and analysis, and all the things that we do on desktop. But a very large component, and if you notice in this picture over here, it is winter and we are working in the water. That was in February of 2025. A lot of the things that we do in wetlands revolve being outside. So I would say about 60% of the year I'm in the field. I would say about another 30% of the year I'm working with landowners, because that's my primary job as an outreach person. But I'm also an ecologist, a scientist, and I've been trained really, really well by Allison Rogerson, who is the lead scientist in our program, to do things outside. And that's all, you know, in a nutshell, do things outside. A very large part of what we do is collaboration. And I would say if you want to work with us, we want to work with you. We really don't shun anybody away. We love working with landowners, partner groups, HOAs, like you name it, we will partner with you. A large part of that is because our program is about 65% grant funded. So not a lot of people realize that within DENREC, a lot of programs get federal grant money. And that includes time, salary, projects, implementation, all the things above that make a program that's not regulatory work, right? So I am not a regulator. I don't get to make the rules, but I do, and my team, we really suggest and give the research to back why things need to be changed, things need to be conserved, or there has to be some sort of difference made in the chain. You know, that's kind of our job. We're not the ones out there who are making the rules. We're kind of giving those legislators or people in power ideas and suggestions on what to work on. And that last bit, that's where I come in, education and outreach. That is a huge, huge, huge part of our program. Allison and Allison work with me at almost every single outreach event. We usually talk to about 6 to maybe 6,500 people a year. That is a lot. So we're out here on the weekends. We're out here with groups like you. And we really couldn't do it without the public because that is how we get our information out there as a small program. And you'll learn managing quote unquote, a very large portion of Delaware's land area. Okay. We're going to start very simple so people know and people get it clear. What is a wetland? All right. So a wetland has 3 characteristics, fairly simple. I won't get too sciencey and I won't get too data heavy. Hydrology, hydric soils, and hydrophytic plants. Those are the 3 components that make up a wetland. And albeit seems simple, and those little graphics are pretty informative, right? You get it. There's water, there's wet soil, there's some kind of cool plant growing there. These are extremely, extremely important for the formation of wetlands, what type of habitat they actually create, which we'll talk about, tidal versus non-tidal, and the different reasons they are ecologically valuable, right? These main components are what we look at when we do assessments, when we monitor these areas, and when we report in as a state organization of what the health and the function of these areas are. So it seems simple, but it really is super cool and in depth. My favorite one are the hydrophytic plants, right? These are plants that have superpowers. They're superheroes. They can live in very, very harsh environments. Working in wetlands is not an easy task. It is very dirty. It is very sweaty. And a lot of times we come home with all those 3 elements on us, right? It is very intense. We're out here in the summertime, we're out here all year, and that's what you have to do to track those 3 elements of these habitats, is really get out there and understand how each of these components work together. And I put a couple examples, just some pictures to get us thinking. I think the first one is really important because this is the same site in the fall versus the spring, and I think this group is probably very in tune with the environments in Delaware, but I took this picture because I work a lot. I'm trying to work a lot with real estate agents because they're kind of a first line of defense in terms of getting information to people who are moving here. And I found that working with them is a really good way to get people who are new to understand the great resources that we have. So we looked at a property in the fall. It's dry. We go back in the spring and the real estate professional's like, oh my gosh, there's a bunch of water here. Is this a wetland? Is this a puddle? And, you know, these types of things, and Mark will speak to this too, you know, these are the types of interactions that have allowed us to kind of deter from protecting these habitats, because to the naked eye, to the untrained eye, you might just think it's wet and I have a puddle and I need to put my sewer somewhere else, or I need to build my house adjacent to that area and kind of call it a day. So I think that's really interesting. I love showing that photo. The 2 types of wetlands that we interact with are tidal and non-tidal, and I'll talk about those. But as you can guess, looking at this soil sample, this core sample, the tidal wetlands are a bit more muddy than the freshwater wetlands, right? And you can see that through these hydric soils like we saw in the last slide. The tidal ones are soupy, they're stinky, they're awesome. but they do require a good footing to walk through, and sometimes in chest-deep mud, where non-tidal tend to be a little more peaceful, kind of shaded, and we'll discuss both of those ecological values of those types of wetlands, but very diverse habitats and separate from each other. And then I just had to put my two favorite superpowers up there. Salt glands, so that is from marsh cordgrass, right? You see this everywhere in Delaware, you see this in marshes. They actually sweat out the salt like we do, so it's very cool. And then another pop quiz, can anyone tell me the species or the type of plant? Yeah, bald cypress, right? So another type of wetland, freshwater wetland, very important to Delaware. But they have these great adaptations that we can learn from. And I like to even think, as we move into this time of a changing climate, how can we adapt, much like wetlands do, to the changes that we're seeing on the ground? And I try and use these for some inspiration when you have a tough day at work. All right, the two types. This is easy. Tidal wetlands, they speak for themselves. They are mainly driven by the tides each day, coming in and out. And there is a decent range in Delaware. There are some rare freshwater tidal wetlands that are very beautiful, but tidal wetland is what I ask a kid to draw me a picture of a beach. They usually draw me something that looks like a tidal wetland that does have phragmite in it, but it also has some native plants as well. A big thing about this is that these habitats are state and federally regulated. And when I say that, I mean if you want to put in a dock, you need to get a permit from the state of Delaware, being DNREC, as well as the Army Corps of Engineers, being the federal government. And we have all sorts of rules and regulations in terms of what can and cannot be done in wetlands. Freshwater wetlands have been pushed to the side, but as of recent are coming to the forefront to have some backup. But tidal wetlands have their own regulatory program, as well as certain activities, again, that are permitted or not permitted. And some things you can do without a permit, right? Removing trash, removing debris. This last winter storm with the trees fallen, we got lots of calls about, I have a tree that's fallen. Do I need a permit to do that? For health and safety, no. But some of these larger scale projects that need tracking and that we have to report data into the government about how many things are being built, how many docks do we have, who has a subaqueous land lease. All those things are through the state and federal regulations that we work closely with our federal partners to try and keep track of. Again, I'm not a permitter, but I do work closely with them in terms of figuring out the best ways to change our programs while also keeping us at bay in terms of what we should and shouldn't do. Wetland types, again, non-tidal or freshwater. You will hear me use that word interchangeably. It's just out of habit. They're both the same thing. So these are mostly freshwater. We talked about that rare saltwater kind of habitat. That's the mix of the two. But these are found more in our inland areas, right? So I really love this map over here because this gives us a really good idea in our county. When we say tidal, naturally we're thinking towards the beach, right? And when we say freshwater or we say non-tidal, we do have some that are kind of intermittently scattered that are more rare, but most of them are going to be in our inland areas, right? They're going to be on the western side of the county, and I'll show a map that gives a better depiction. But I really thought I love this. I love all this because in this area, this is where we have the start of those freshwater wetlands that end up going that way, right? Out here, not so much. Out here has been developed quite a bit. But here, if you look on some of our internal maps, this is really where we get the start of these very critical, very beautiful, diverse habitats. And they are fed by snow, rain, and groundwater, so a little bit different than the tidal wetlands themselves. The water levels change season to season, right? So that's another characteristic of identity that people struggle with. When you go to a tidal wetland, when you go, to a marsh, you pretty much know that you're in a marsh, right? And you see the water and you know the plants and you know it's going to be muddy, you know how it's going to work. When you go to these freshwater habitats, and the sampling is just a picture, a couple pictures of different ones. There's a multitude of different freshwater habitats that we have in Delaware, all equally as important in very different ways. The main component with this one, they are federally regulated. but there is, at the moment, everybody please cross your fingers, very little state regulation, okay? Very, very little state regulation. So in Delaware, you need about 400 continuous acres of freshwater wetlands in order for a state permit to be triggered. So does anyone know anywhere that's 400 acres? Go. Yes, right? Great Cypress Swamp, okay? There are places that's about 11,000 acres. There's only a few, right? There's only a few of those. If you can find a neighborhood that has 400 continuous acres of freshwater wetlands, please give my hotline a call because we would like to see that. With that has come a lot of oversight and has come a lot of damage. And we are now looking back as an organization and as a program to think, where did we go wrong? How can we improve in the future? And the legislation Mark is going to talk about is a big part of that. Allison Rogerson, who I mentioned earlier, was an integral part of it, as well as other members in this room. I sat in on the calls. I did the desktop research. I was just there as support and just really happy to learn. But again, we're talking about if you want to do something in a freshwater wetland, it's pretty much the Wild West. And as we see, again, looking at this map over here, we're looking in those areas, we're seeing changes, we're seeing a lot of development, a lot of, impacts from agriculture. We are an agricultural-based state, through and through, tried and true, that is what we are. But we have to think about how we're going to change some of the things going on. Legislation is one of them. Landowner outreach is one of them. And really getting to know what's going on in these freshwater habitats is really, really important for their future and for some of the benefits that they provide us. I love that picture. Does anyone know what type of deer that is? No, I love a pop quiz. Yeah, piebald deer. So only about 2% of all white-tailed deer have that disease. I was very excited to catch that on a wildlife camera in Millsboro, outside of Cupola Park. So really in our backyard, we have amazing things. And I love taking pictures, so you're gonna see a lot of different things. Now we're gonna talk about, bring it back down to some of the science and data, right? And where we're headed as a program, what we do. Where do they stand? So in Delaware right now, these are our most updated maps. We will be working for the next 10 years to update our wetland maps. It does take 10 years to do that. These are our most recent maps. We have 44% tidal wetlands and 56% non-tidal wetlands. Is that a shock to anyone that there are more non-tidal freshwater than tidal? Yeah. A lot of people think of Delaware, they think of the beach, right? They think of the beach. But really, when you zoom out and you think about it, there is so much green in this area, right? And those little orange pieces are those rare freshwater tidal wetlands I mentioned before. I had to throw those on the map because they're extremely important, extremely beautiful, but I can't give you the exact location of where they are. You'll see pictures of other places you might recognize, but those are really special. So those non-tidal wetlands really make up the majority of what we have going on in Delaware. If you break down the land area of that map, 23% of the state is made up of wetland habitats. So my program of 3 is working with almost 1/4 of the land area that we have. I even like to break this down further to our property ownership, right? I did a little research on who owns what wetlands in our state. This was a shock to me. 20% are state and federally owned. 80% are privately owned. I think that speaks for itself. For me, when I kind of did this research a couple years ago, it was like a light bulb went off and I was like, wow, this is shocking. This makes me worried for the future, but it also inspires me to think about what are the pathways that we now can protect these habitats and who can we involve in the conversation at the table of how to do this, right? Because we can't do it alone. When you look at that 20%, what can we really do with that as the state? We can make preservation acts, we can do all sorts of conservation work. I can spend 5 or 6 years on a restoration project to get 15 acres of a wetland. That's great, I love that. But for you guys, you are the key players in this situation because you own these habitats And anywhere you stand in Delaware, you're within 1 mile of a wetland. So I know at every single one of your homes and your investments or your family's houses, you're right next to where these places are. So I just really love that graph. And I won't make it too sciencey, but that's the breakdown of what we're looking at when we say wetlands in Delaware. Yeah. Yeah, I love that question. Oh, sure. Yeah, so she had asked, where do stormwater management ponds or drainage ponds, especially in neighborhoods, where do they fall into this category? So unfortunately, those are not natural wetlands. So when we do our wetland maps, our wetland surveys, things like that, that are very science heavy, they can come up as a mapped wetland, but we basically what's called QA them, and we research to discover that they are stormwater ponds. There is some debate, I know in other states, like I think in Ohio, they kind of like to consider them a natural wetland. Here in Delaware and by our program standards, they are not. They are man-made. They do not have the same ecological value and do not provide the same benefits to us. On the flip side, we do like to work with communities to improve their stormwater pond buffers because we want people to have that aesthetic value, but also the protection in their neighborhood. And those places can also be ecologically uplifted, right? They may not be the same as natural wetlands, and we are considering them a loss when we see more stormwater ponds that go in place of wetlands. That is considered a loss when we are calculating. But overall, we try and do our best to have people improve those areas. Is that helpful? Okay. Other questions at all? Sure. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not, see, that's the mic. I told you, get nervous.
Okay, I'll make it quick. So, a tidal wetland implicitly has a connection to the waters of the U.S., federally regulated, blah, blah. I'm heading to Sackett. How has Sackett affected you? And I'd frame the question in two pieces. The land that Sackett took out from CWA regulation, how much of your portfolio does that constitute? And if Sackett says the federal government can't regulate water without an adjacency, how does that affect state legislation? Thank you so much. It's the Supreme Court decision from 2023, written by Mr. Alito.
Yeah, great question. Loaded question for sure. I don't know if I have enough time to answer all of it. Our program has been impacted by that decision. Our research has been impacted. Our funding has been impacted. It is a multifaceted trickle-down effect. Mark, probably, I assume you'll speak a little bit of background on that, as well as the future implications and how that's all connected. I don't want to steal his thunder. Us as a program, yes, it's impacted a lot of the work that we do, and also how we communicate that work in terms of what wetlands are important and where and why. That's I wouldn't say a lot. I would say a concerning amount based on their ecological value and benefits that they provide to the human and natural world alike. Anybody add anything? Yeah, I think Mark will cover that. He'll get more in detail for sure. All right, the good stuff. All these questions. How do we know what the conditions of wetlands are? What are the methods we use to determine these trends? There's only 3 of us. Can we really do it? How do we analyze the status of wetlands and report that out to the public? And of course, what projects are prioritized? The future, the past, all these things that come across our desk every day that could keep you up at night if you were knee deep in it yourself. We do a lot of different things, and I could probably do a whole presentation on all the different stuff that we are up to. But again, we are not a regulatory program. We are really, really advocating for the proper management and understanding of wetlands in Delaware. We've had some major wins. SB 9 is one of those things. We've had some minor wins. The buffer ordinance, better than nothing, right? That's what we always say in our program. It is better than nothing, much like I think what Steve was saying earlier, right? We have to start somewhere. We do a lot of mapping and monitoring. okay? And we do that by foot. We do a lot of desktop analysis, looking at maps. That's all good, but you have to get out and see these places in person to understand what condition they're in. What's growing there? How much of it is growing there? Is there a possible, potential for a project to be in place? What is surrounding the area that's impacting that wetland, making it less ecologically valuable or just not functioning the right way? So when it comes to mapping and monitoring, that is really integrated into all of our projects, all of our suggestions, quote unquote, everything that we do. Mapping and monitoring is involved, even when it comes to landowner outreach. And that's a huge part of my job, K through 12. It's also integrated into that. We do a lot of research projects. Again, we're 2/3 federally grant funded or state grant funded. So we really, really rely on our partners to not only support the work that we do, but also give us a little bit of extra financial support in terms of what we have going on. And the nice thing about the partners that we work with, some are in this room, Delaware Nature Society, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the Center for Inland Bays, I work with a lot. Lisa Swanger there is like the me, but there. They really, really provide insight in terms of how we can prioritize projects and what each of us are good at, right? So I'm really good at driving boats. I grew up on the water. That's very helpful for some people who have never stepped in a wetland at all, but need to be out there to get some of the data and information to make our projects successful, right? So lots of different research projects, anything from, we have a current restoration project in Millsboro. I'm calling it the Never Ending Project. It has been going on for many years. That is happening at Cupola Park. I also am very integrated into living shorelines, right? And I won't get into all the details of that stuff. I brought it to with the table over there, so you can check it out. But all sorts of different ways that we can learn from wetlands and how we can integrate those types of projects for landowners is kind of where we're headed right now. Protocols and methods. I'll leave it at that. I'm not the Allisons, right? I'm not a scientist by trade, but by heart I am. There's lots of science and protocols and standards of practice that we come up with and we develop and then share with our partners and other professionals. We want to give people, especially other professionals in the Mid-Atlantic, something that's tangible. And if we can come up with protocols and methods that are standardized, meaning that someone else can repeat and maybe even find more data out, that's really important. And so that I'd say next to mapping and monitoring, that is another pillar of our stool, our three-legged stool, I'll call it, that helps us find a pathway of how we're going to manage these places, right? Because a lot of times you have to have the data and science to get the grants. You have to have the data and science for the feds to get on board. You have to have the data and science for partners to get on board. So it's a really, really important part. We do assessments statewide and federally. Again, a lot of sweating, a lot of early days, a lot of boat driving, a lot of mosquito bites and ticks. That's just the nature of it, but it's really fun, and that's where I get all the cool photos from. And then that last one, education and sharing. That is the last pillar on our three-legged stool. I mentioned this before. Education and sharing is a huge part, whether it's our partners getting information out, or it's me getting information out, or it's a student at a school who's like, I've never seen a wetland. What is that? How do I learn about it? What do you have online that I could play with, right? Because kids love screens. It's like, well, it's a wetland. It's outside. It's tough. It's a tough world. It's a really tough world. Again, grants, partners, and state funding, really important component. Last part of this one, I broke down wetland acreage by county currently. Surprise, surprise. Sussex comes in at the first level. I am not surprised by this. Again, these numbers were a lot higher, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. We've lost about 62% of all wetlands in Delaware since the 1750s. So you can imagine what it was like. Probably pretty rough terrain, but very interesting. Sussex is 1. Kent is 2, right? Kent County is a beautiful county. Lots of hidden gem wetlands there. Newcastle, they're last, but they're still in first place for me. A lot of the ecologically important freshwater wetlands, or what we call unique wetland communities, UWCs, are in Newcastle County and Sussex County. So even though Newcastle is very developed and kind of, if you look on a map, a lot of stuff is red and orange, that means bad. They do have really incredible freshwater wetlands that link back to what Mark's going to talk about in a little bit. What else is at play? So I tried to really summarize in the next two slides what we are doing for wetlands, because that's what you guys asked me to talk about. Gains and losses, development. There's a period there. I have been in Delaware my whole life. It has changed a lot since I was a kid, okay? A lot. I remember when the Wawa in Lewis opened, and we were like, oh my gosh, there's a Wawa in town. We're gonna all sit in our cars in high school in 9th grade, and we're gonna hang out. And that's what we're doing, right? We're going to the beach and we're going to Wawa. It's just changed a lot. And that's okay. Climate change, it's happening, it's real, it's here. We're combating it on a daily basis. Professionals are combating it. You guys are combating it and advocating for it. That's another one that is a period, you know, climate change period. And we are really trying to shape our projects around the future and or how we can benefit ourselves, but also people who live in Delaware. And a variety of industry impact. All sorts of stuff are open to that, right? We've got ecotourism that's good and some ecotourism that's bad. That's an example of something where it's like, well, it's great, but also how can we adapt? Policy and regulation. There have been very, very poor planning practices put in place in the state and the county. It makes it very challenging to do projects. It makes it very challenging to communicate what we want to do when everybody, you know, all 3 counties are like their own government. It's very challenging for us to navigate that pathway. Increase in population. Yeah, a lot of people move here. I love it. I know why. I stayed here. Let's do it differently. Administrations on all levels, right? County level, local level, federal level, state level. There's always shifts. There's always changes. The paradigm does swing. When it's swinging in the direction of not in favor of wetlands, that's something else that we're up against at the moment. And then the good stuff, learning nature, okay? Education, sharing, and advocacy. I feel like interacting with all the people I do a year, there's more people that are into the environment than there ever have been. And that's something that we can really play into as a department and with our partners and tap into these people as resources, because you guys are the advocates. You guys are the people talking to your neighbors. You guys might go to your neighbor tomorrow and say, we saw these incredible presentations last night at the Sussex Conservation. You know, you can spread the word. So that's really, really a key part of what we do. Invasive species, I have to highlight that because, again, more people are informing themselves on the importance of native plants and the not so much importance of invasive species, okay? I love that movement, I support that movement, and it has a really major impact on wetlands in Delaware. Habitat, species, and identification. Facebook, iNaturalist, social media. You can learn a lot, you just have to be careful. That is really a movement that I love under Learning Nature. That's something that supports what we do, but also educates people and connects people who are like-minded together. Again, there's only 3 of me. There's thousands and thousands of people in this state that are always identifying things, finding plants, finding things that I don't get to see, and sending it our way so we can all be on the same page about how we move forward to protect and understand wetlands. And just a little snapshot. I'm going over my time, I'll rush through. This is kind of where we're headed in the next 5 years. I am working with, I had to spotlight a few things. These are all the different categories we work under. That's pretty much everything you can think of in terms of the environment. I had to highlight the Bays to Backyards program. That is with the Center for Inland Bays. It is a great program. Look it up. Lisa Swanger and myself, I would say, are the key partners in it and kind of keeping the train moving. But lots of great partners are involved in that program. And I just suggest when you're bored on your iPad, definitely look it up. We just came out with our 2026 to 2030 Delaware Wetland Program Plan. Something else if you're kind of looking for a good read, a good 45-page scientific read. That is a great resource, and that, again, is guiding us where we are going to go and can give you some really good insight about what projects we're doing and what impact you guys can make and help us do our job. This summer, we are doing a federal wetland assessment for the EPA. It is 2 times a week for 12 weeks. It is very intensive and it follows a protocol, but it reports to the federal government the status of wetlands in Delaware. And that is so, so important, as we know, on a federal level right now, to get that information that's accurate up the chain. Whether it gets listened to or not, that's okay. We're doing the right work. We also just hired a field biologist, right? We have a seasonal who's helping us with a project we're working on in the inland bays. So, you know, the possibilities are endless. I could go on for hours about all the different things we're working on, but I figured little icons will just do the trick for now. I will rush through these last parts. Why do they matter? I'll keep it brief. Protect and ensure. I think the pictures speak for itself. This is where we are headed. This is what we are living in. These are conditions that I work in that photo, okay? It can be difficult, but it really is inspiring to know that wetlands are sponges. They are our first line of defense when we are up against anything that is coming from the impacts of climate change, especially the negative impacts, right? Negative impacts. They stabilize our shorelines. A lot of that has to do with those plant superheroes that I mentioned, okay? Those plants and those roots are really, really important. And they reduce storm impacts and wave energy. I mean, critical for what we're up against, especially in this county, especially in this area. Those wetlands are providing us free protection, no cost to us. We need to keep them around. Biodiversity hotspots. I should have just put all pictures on this slide. I thought I was going to be a Nat Geo photographer when I was younger. That did not work out. But these things are incredible, right? These are nurseries. Wetlands are nurseries for so many different species that are important to us, important to the natural world. And it really is all interconnected. They provide habitat to endangered species. I know some people don't think that matters, but it does. It really, really does. And we learn a lot from these type of endangered species on how they interact with their environment and what they do in their environment. It gives us insight on how wetlands can work, right? How wetlands can work. And support native plants. We talked about that as well. Economic value. I love my job. I love that anybody who works outside, anyone who is really spending time in Delaware's natural and cultural resources, they get it. You guys get it. You have a backyard, right? You look out and you think, this is my life. I live in an incredible place. That has economic value, whether it's ecotourism, whether it's doing, you know, recreational shellfishing or commercial shellfishing. 90% of shellfish and commercial shellfish nurse in wetlands, okay? 90%. If you took wetlands away, that whole industry would crumble, would completely crumble. And it decreases the cost of water filtration, okay, and treatment. That's something fun. Again, look it up on your iPad. Lots of good science out there. We're trying to get the numbers finite. It's hard. But again, there's reasons that wastewater treatment facilities are built right next to wetlands or on top of wetlands, right? That's a good example. They clean and help our waters. I think all of those things speak for themselves. They purify, they take out all sorts of bad stuff. They give us better water quality. They give the flora and fauna that we adore better water quality. And they help our water supply, whether it's aquifers, drinking water, groundwater, whatever it is. We need them around to make a safe space for water in our world. Recreation and education. That's my daughter. That was a long time ago when she was little. She just graduated 5th grade yesterday. So it's a tough day. I grew up going to Trap Pond with my dad. I take my kids to Trap Pond now, and I want my kids to take their kids to Trap Pond. That's what I grew up doing. It's really, really important to have those outdoor educational opportunities, whether you're in school, whether you're with your family, or whether it's your first time even seeing the ocean. I work with kids, you know, in northern counties, never been to the beach. It's crazy. You know, it's really crazy. Field classrooms are really important. And then the last one, aesthetic appeal and helping us. I like to say we need nature now more than ever, right? There's so many things in the world. There's so many different elements and you're bogged down by time and management and what's going on. Wetlands are an escape for us, especially in Delaware. We're talking 1/4 of the state, very accessible since you guys own them and then we own the other portion. You can get to them, right? You can get to them. Wetlands and you, this is all I'll say. I said it before. We need nature now more than ever. You have to find your why, okay? I found my why. My husband is a school teacher at Love Creek. He found his why. You guys probably have plenty of experience and lifetime of your why. Bring it now to wetlands because they matter. They have a huge impact on where the state is headed in terms of climate management and really management of our natural and cultural resources. Extremely, extremely important. I know I went over my time. I'm sorry. That's it from me.
I'm going to cut short questions so that we can get through our cleanup hitter, who is Mark Nardone. Do we have to make a transition, Pam? Okay. Olivia has brought a variety of things over on the table to share. And so I'm sure that she will stay around a little bit after so that if people have some questions that you'd like to pose to her and look through the materials that she's brought with her. Olivia mentioned several times during her presentation Mark Nardone, who was involved in the discussions about the Wetlands Protection Bill that's making its way through, as was Christoph Tulu, who's the director of the Center for Inland Bays, who is here tonight as well. Mark has been with the Delaware Nature Society for about 4 years, following a much longer career in the media, communications, and public relations. He has spent time with Delaware Today and the Winterthur Museum, which are two of the more established institutions in the state of Delaware. He's also a graduate of the University of Delaware, probably not in the same class. Sorry, Mark, as Olivia, but close, right? But he's going to especially talk tonight about SB 9, which is the bill which is pending now in the General Assembly. And we are leading up to a discussion about how all of you can make a difference in the next month, 6 weeks, on both of these fronts, right? Both forest preservation and on wetlands. So, Mark?
Wow. Thanks, Joe. Olivia, that was amazing. I am sorry. I'm going to be a terrible disappointment after that, but I will do my best. Again, Mark Nardone, Delaware Nature Society. I'm the director of advocacy. My why. I grew up on a farm outside of Newark. It's no longer a farm, but it was wooded. Sorry, not good with these things. It was wooded, and we had some of those wetlands. And as you know, you're a 10, 11-year-old kid. It's just a great place to catch tadpoles and look for turtles. I later moved to Newcastle. So, you know, myself and a bunch of my marsh rat buddies were out there trapping muskrats, doing things like that. And I spend way too much time in Fenwick Island, you know, sailing on Assiniboine Bay and just having fun. That is why I got into this. You know, this was a passion thing for me. I should probably tell you a little bit about the Delaware Nature Society. We've been around for 60 plus years. Member organization, about 6,000 people. We have 4 sites throughout the state. The closest is Abbott's Mill in Milford, great wetland area. And we are about 3 things. One is education. We do a lot of programs to educate people about the natural world. Conservation, we manage about 2,000 acres across the state, all sorts of environments. And I should say the 4 sites are all very different environments too. And the third part is advocacy. So we are working for the kind of public policies that protect our wetlands, our open space, things like that. And I'm sorry, since Joe told you that I grew up in the media, I went into media because I was a writer, right? Writers are notoriously bad speakers, so I'm more of a reader. And I'm going to start at the beginning here. Where are we? Okay, I want to make sure I'm on the right slide. I'm going to go way back. So 1972, we passed the Federal Clean Water Act. That was a lot. That was among many big federal bills, environmental bills at the time. That included things like the Clean Air Amendments in 1970, the National Environmental Policy Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, other big landmark legislation. The big thing about the Clean Water Act basically regulates pollution discharge into U.S. waters. It set water quality standards, and it prevents drilling and, filling and dredging of wetlands. That is the single biggest reason why we've made so much progress on water quality in the country for 50 plus years. Soon after we passed the CWA, the state passed the Delaware Wetlands Act. That was 1973, largely in response to rapid development along the coast, might sound familiar, and some other forces. That law gave the state authority to regulate dredging, filling, construction in marshes, and areas regularly flooded by tides. Also passed shortly after that, I should mention, is the Coastal Zone Act. Is everybody familiar with that law? Besides Denrick. Coastal Zone Act is a really amazing piece of legislation. It basically, if you were to draw a line up the coast, you know, for 2 or 3 miles inland, it protects everything from Fenwick Island up to the C&D Canal, basically from heavy industry. There is, you know, a refinery in the area that predated the act, but it is the reason why we have all these beautiful marshes. It's the reason why we don't look like Galveston Bay. That very well could have happened if not for that piece of legislation. The Delaware Wetlands Act did not cover non-tidal wetlands, covered only tidal wetlands. Sorry, trying to hold, read, and advance at the same time. Somebody mentioned earlier how we compare to other jurisdictions. Maryland and New Jersey were way ahead of us on protecting non-tidal wetlands. They enacted their own laws in 1988, 1989, and they included both tidal and non-tidal wetlands. Delaware left their protection to the provisions of the CWA and managed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So we are still, as of this moment, hopefully to change soon, the only state in the region without state level non-tidal wetland protections. Where it gets tricky. On the right slide. Okay. That was. Slide? I don't think I am. I am. Well, sort of a lost opportunity. Olivia mentioned that wetlands cover about 1/4 of the state. Half of our 300,000 acres of wetlands are freshwater wetlands. And that land is being converted to human uses at an unprecedented rate, you know, and nowhere more rapidly than areas where these wetlands are common. You saw Olivia's map, and I'm going to show you another one in just a second. Recent changes, you asked a question about the Sackett decision earlier. Recent changes to the Clean Water Act left about 75,000 acres of non-tidal wetlands high and dry. Bad pun, but I say it all the time. High and dry, totally vulnerable to degradation and destruction. Among the things that the Sackett decision did was it redefined waters of the U.S. And those are the waters that are federally regulated. It reduced them to only those waters that are navigable or have a continuous surface water connection. Non-tidal wetlands, or isolated wetlands, we call them too, are connected at the surface, or not connected at the surface, but they are often connected underground. So critics of that decision criticize the source for not understanding the basic science of water. Christoph did so beautifully in an op-ed, and they didn't understand the science of water. Basically, it is all connected. A couple of maps. Olivia showed you similar ones earlier. I think mine are a little out of date. But you can see, that is a significant portion of the state. And I throw this map up here too. This came from Spotlight, Delaware, not too long ago. If you're familiar with state strategies for policy and spending, it governs where the state wants to invest in development, where it wants to preserve and protect farmland, natural areas. Those blue dots are all developments in those areas that we want to protect. So of all the state level 4 areas that we want to protect, we have in Sussex County developed about 25% of them over the past couple of decades. It's amazing. So why do we want to protect wetlands now? A lot of things have happened in the state recently. We recently updated the state wildlife management plan. One of the big aims of that is protecting habitat. So as Olivia mentioned, these wetlands are home to amazing plant and animal species. Some of them can live nowhere else. There are things like bog turtles and Bethany Beach firefly. It lives in the dunes. It can't live anywhere else, and it's endangered. We have a new climate action plan with the state, DENREC updated just earlier this year. One of the actions it recommends is protecting the resources that sequester carbon, right? The plan was blah, 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 blah. All I will say is wetlands are huge carbon sinks. They're very effective at storing carbon. The more of them we lose, the less capacity we have to store that carbon. It's consistent with state strategies for policy spending, as I just mentioned. Wetlands help manage stormwater. We just talked about that a little bit. That would otherwise spill into our roads and yards and farm field, and they help ensure safe drinking water. You know, those wetlands filter all those things that, as Olivia mentioned, reduces the complexity and the cost of water treatment. Since 1988, there have been 7 major attempts to protect non-tidal wetlands. None of them has succeeded. Why? You know, I think part of the reason was the Army Corps was managing these wetlands, so people didn't see the need for the state to do that. Some people simply just did not understand the value of the wetlands. And I think, you know, probably the biggest reason, Olivia's slide, 80% of them are privately owned, often owned by large landowners, and folks just don't like being told what they can and cannot do on their properties. So the Wetland Stewardship Act, SB 9, that's designed to do that. It creates a permitting framework within the state for regulation of the wetlands, including unique and high-functioning wetlands. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And it streamlines permitting process. That is a big priority for the governor right now. It sets deadlines for approvals of permits if you want to do something in your wetland. It speeds that along a little bit if you want to build that dock or that, you know, pier or a bridge through the wetland. And I'll just stop there. Going to go back again. You know, this all started, the latest effort started with Senate Joint Resolution 2. That was a couple years, that was about 3 years ago. It required the Department of Natural Resources to, with federal agencies, identify the structure, the legal structure, the administrative structure, and the resources it needed to create a non-tidal wetlands permitting program in the state. That would shift that responsibility from the Army Corps to DENREC. And there were some reporting requirements too. It's not really important. In June, and this was after the Sackett decision, there was an update of that resolution, and it requested DENREC to look at, sorry, I told you I got to read. I can't do this ad lib. I have to read. I'm not kidding about that. But using the new information about the new federal regulations, it was directing DENREC to update that analysis. And that resulted in a bill, May 2024, that would do essentially what SB 9 would do now. You know, right out of the chute, critics came out, opposed the bill, so it didn't go anywhere. It didn't get a vote. That proved to be a good thing because we learned what all the major objections were to the bill, could find ways to counter that. And it ultimately reduced the expense or the cost of setting up a management program, led to a much, much better bill. SB 9. Here are we? I am definitely out of sync here. SB 9. So what does it do? It creates a state wetlands program that covers both tidal and non-tidal wetlands, rather than create a separate program for non-tidal wetlands, which was the intent of the bill that came out a couple years ago. It would do both in the same department. It fills the gap in jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act, and it improves those efficiencies in the permitting process. It sets strict timelines on DENREC to respond to permit applications. Blah, blah, blah. Priority governor, yada, yada, said that. And I should say, correct me if I'm wrong, part of the problem with permitting, it was taking people forever to get permits. It was a very big complaint. And I think DENREC was unfairly criticized for that. There are only so many people, and they just simply could not keep up with the volume of permits. So this program, or this bill, if it's passed, will allow DENREC to hire 15 new folks. That's a huge staffing upgrade in one shot. And an important part of this bill, it puts the burden of proof of you have to prove that you're a wetland. If you're the owner, you have to prove that it's an important freshwater wetland. You would have to hire a professional wetlands delineator to do that. And again, all the same things. They examine the soils, the hydrology, the plants, the characterize wetlands. If it is found to be a valuable wetland in some way, you have to have a permit. If not, you do not. DENREC's going to consider these permit applications. It has to consider several things. One is environmental impact, of course. That's the impact on the flora and fauna, the impact of site preparation for, normal drainage, land erosion, water quality and quantity, groundwater recharge, the related watershed. Every wetland is in a watershed, and other resources. It has to consider the effect on nearby uses, including increase in water retention or flood risk, recreational areas, residential or agricultural areas. Means if you fill in an area here, where's that water going to go? Is it going to go somewhere else that causes a problem? Your neighbor's yard, a farmer's field, something like that. It has to consider the county's comprehensive plans. Is the project in an area that's designated for growth, or is it someplace that's supposed to be protected? DENREC will have to consider that kind of thing. It has to create job creation and economic effect. Is there income, jobs, tax revenue that is going to result from this project, and aesthetic effect. Is the project ugly? It's not a huge criteria, but it is one. Generally not making decisions based entirely on that. Okay. What else does the law do? Or the bill? What would the law do? It protects wetlands of exceptional value, and that means unique wetlands. Wetlands that are categorized by DENREC as places like coastal plains, seasonal ponds, or Delmarva bays, the Interdune Depression meadows where that Bethany Beach firefly lives, peatland fens, Piedmont stream valley wetlands, bald cypress swamps, Atlantic cedar swamps, black ash seepage swamps. It protects high functioning wetlands. That means the wetlands are maintaining the highest rating of function, condition, health, or the wetlands that are working hydrologically. I can't even say that word. Again, somebody has to come out and examine that for you. It includes wetlands that would serve or could serve as habitat for threatened or endangered flora or fauna under the Endangered Species Act, or listed as endangered by the state. It protects wetlands near public or private water supplies, and it protects wetlands in designated natural areas that are designated on the State Registry of Natural Areas. It exempts from permitting certain practices, farming, if you've been farming in an area for quite a while. It exempts intent to farm. If you have a plan to farm and you have had for a while, that will be exempted. In general, farmers don't plant wet areas, and though new wet areas have emerged on farms, they generally wouldn't be delineated as wetlands. They don't have the flora, the soils, that kind of thing. It exempts from permitting forestry activities that are permitted by the Department of Ag, conservation practices on lands that are in programs through certain federal government agencies, lots of conservation programs there. It exempts hunting, fishing, trapping, duck blinds, things like that. It exempts wildlife nesting structures, like the osprey nesting piers, wood duck boxes, mosquito control activities, construction of certain drainage features, footbridges, excuse me, and normal gardening and lawn maintenance practices. You can still cut your grass, you can still plant what you want. Conditionally exempt are things like activities that would be allowed under a nationwide permit issued by the Army Corps of Engineers, work performed by state, county, or municipal governments or conservation districts. Boy, I put a lot of legal language in here. I'm just going to gloss over it. Non-tidal wetlands in the Delaware Atlantic Coastal Plains Province with a contributing area of less than 800 acres. So things like drainage ditches, removal of fallen trees, that kind of thing, you will not have to seek a permit for most of those activities. Maintenance, reconstruction, retrofitting, work performed with help of conservation district or government program. That means things like maintaining tax ditches, if you're familiar with those, and not wetlands, non-tidal wetlands that are equal to or less than a contiguous half acre if they don't qualify as exceptional value wetlands. And I should say, I probably stole quite a few of your photos. Are these looking familiar? Okay, yeah, good. All right. Photography by Olivia Allred. SB 9, this is where it gets a little bit complicated. It would establish a Wetlands Regulatory Advisory Committee that would help DNREC develop the initial regulations required to regulate the wetlands and to evaluate the permitting processes. That's a little outside of most of our expertise, but we'll be taking a look at that. And then again, defining the regulations. This is kind of where the rubber hits the road. This committee is big, much bigger than most government committees. It includes folks from the county governments, all 3 counties. It includes folks from the Farm Bureau, the conservation districts, various environmental advocacy groups, an environmental justice organization. It also includes folks like the Home Builders Association of Delaware, the Association of Realtors, the Council of Engineering Companies, the Delmarva Chicken Association. There are a lot of folks who have an interest in this bill. All those folks worked to develop this. Christoph at the center, the Nature Conservancy, the Sierra Club, a lot of the organizations I just mentioned. That committee is designed to represent the whole state as fairly as possible, to balance all those interests, and to come up with something that, regulations that everybody could live with. Anything that they decide should be a regulation has to be approved by a majority plus 2. And I neglected to mention that 2 of the folks on that advisory committee, to kind of balance the environmental/conservation interest with the building and development and farming interest, are professional wetlands professionals, professional delineators, and an academic who has specific experience there. In theory, majority plus 2 prevents deadlocks on issues, and there will be some really heavy discussions about what is an exceptional value wetland. They start meeting in August. They have to have their work done in a year. If DNREC accepts our regulations, or DNREC has agreed to enforce whatever regulation that committee comes up with, that is a huge concession on DNREC's part. Usually, yeah, sorry, question. Exactly. Did everybody hear that? SB 9 creates the regulatory authority, but the regulatory advisory committee comes up with the regulations themselves, if that makes sense. Generally, that is work that DNREC would do. They are trusting a bunch of folks who have an interest, if they're not exactly wetlands professionals and scientists, to create the regulations. So you can see, what a big gift that is from DNREC. But and as I said, there will be a lot of discussion about certain things like what are high functioning wetlands, what are exceptional value wetlands. We use the science. DNREC will be there in an advisory capacity to keep us all straight, so we can't express, so opinions don't win out over real science and data. And after it finishes its work, we'll watch DNREC for a little while and then report back on how they're doing. Okay. Under the bill, non-tidal and tidal wetlands are determined by a new Delaware wetlands screening tool and associated scoring criteria. The bill says the tool should score wetlands in established categories such as high, moderate, and low function. That helps us determine what should be regulated, what shouldn't. It'll help ensure that proper permitting procedures are used and identify those exceptional value wetlands, which get, special protections. And again, they are exceptional value because they are ecologically unique or high functioning, because they support those plants and animal species that are endangered and threatened, unique to wetlands. They are located in those designated natural areas. They are located in a public water supply, a source water protection area, or areas that contribute to drinking water. And that scoring methodology is not in the bill. Again, that is something that DNREC will develop, through the regulation. That will also take some work. I'm going to skip this because it's boring. So, there is a cost associated with this. In the first year, DNREC anticipates nearly $1 million in general startup cost. That includes hiring all those new staff folks, environmental specialist scientist, and an enforcement coordinator. There are another $700,000 in recurring costs. So the total first year cost for the program is about $1.7 million. So this is where we get to the interesting part legislatively. Anytime there's a fiscal note, if you don't know what a fiscal note is, that basically says to the folks who make the budget decisions in the General Assembly that it's going to cost money to enact this new law. It is evaluated, do we have the money to create the program, and a decision is made from there. Do we want it enough to create that program? That's a big part of the decision. So because there's a fiscal note, there's sort of an extra, what do I want to say? Not an extra layer. Generally, most bills are passed by a simple majority of either House, the Senate, or the House of Representatives. If there's a fiscal note attached, if there are certain penalties attached for violating the law, it's a 2/3 vote. So tomorrow, the Senate will vote on this bill. It's been heard in the Senate Environmental Committee. There was a whole lot of support for the bill. And I should talk about the process here, too. So I mentioned a few minutes ago that 2 years ago, there was a similar bill introduced. And immediately, people come, I don't know where they come from. I don't know how they hear about these things, but all of a sudden, they're in Legislative Hall, and they are talking about how much they don't like this bill. So that bill was shelved, and we went back to the drawing board. Senator Stephanie Hansen used to be an environmental lawyer, was a county councilman in Newcastle County with a lot of land use experience. She is the biggest champion we have for most environmental legislation in the state. That was her bill. She killed it. She brought all the stakeholders together. So I want to say within a week of the day that bill was withdrawn, she got everybody together in a room at the Dover Public Library, and we all talked about how we were going to get something done. All those same stakeholders were there, the home builders, the Realtors Association, all the environmental folks. And that began a series of meetings that lasted almost 2 years. Those meetings, there were, at any given time, 30, 40, 50 people sitting in the room. No, maybe not, 20, 30 people sitting in the room. On the Zoom screen, there were anywhere from another 100 to 150. Again, farmers who have traditionally opposed this kind of legislation, builders who want to build things, and they want to, they want to understand rules so that they can do it efficiently. That series of meetings lasted until a couple of months ago. The bill was finalized, lots of talking, and I think what we like to say here is what we got to in the end was not a perfect bill, but it was something that everybody could live with. Everybody gave a little, everybody got a little. So when this was heard by the Senate Environment Committee about a month ago, there was a lot of support from people in that room, in those meetings. When you have farmers getting up and not saying, we don't oppose this bill, when they get up and they say, we support this bill, a farmer, traditional opponent, got up and said, I support this bill. Hopefully you're on the right track. That bill passed out of committee, 7 folks on the Environment Committee. 1 was absent, unanimous vote, so that means it had bipartisan support. In our outreach to legislators in the Senate before this vote that's going to happen tomorrow, we talk a lot about that process. For folks who don't know about the previous 7 attempts, who haven't heard all the arguments and debates before, it's important to understand that there is real support for protecting the wetlands right now. Again, why now? I think the Sackett decision got the people. They understand that anything could happen to these wetlands right now. You could start a tire dump. You could completely fill them in. If you are an owner, you can do pretty much whatever you want to most of these wetlands right now. Hopefully that will change. So tomorrow, we have the vote in the Senate. We're pretty confident that 2/3 of them will vote to pass this. And I heard today that if it passes tomorrow, next week, it will end up in the House Appropriations Committee. It has to go through the committee process before it's released to the floor. The committee may decide that bill will never see the light of day. I don't think they will. They have that kind of power. So why appropriations? Why not the House Environment Committee? Again, there's a fiscal note. It's going to cost a little bit of money to start this program. So they have to make sure that the money is there. The money is there. We have pretty good revenue forecast, better than expected for fiscal 27. So that's a good sign. The folks on that committee are not environmentally oriented all the time, so there's a little education that has to happen there. But if it passes out at the committee, it goes to the House, and good Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, they will pass it this year. You know, and I have been watching this from afar my whole life. I'm a little older than Olivia. And I was around when Christoph started, actually, as a newspaper reporter. I have been watching this all my life. So hopefully, this is the time where this finally happens. We enter the 21st century in terms of environmental protection. So I will make the humble plea. If you have the time, if you have the capacity, and if you want help, I'm willing to offer that. Write to your legislators. If you think this is important, let them know that. Let them know why. Anything that we can do. If it doesn't pass now, who knows when we'll get this opportunity again. But super important. We need to protect those wetlands for all the reasons that Olivia mentioned. The video that we saw at the beginning was an amazing, super powerful piece of work. I think you can see what happens when we're neglecting the environment. And with that, I will conclude because I am a terrible public speaker and incredibly anxious and much better at taking questions than trying to read my scripts that I can't stick to anyway. All right, Joe.
So we actually were going to make the same pitch, and Wendy, where's Wendy? Is going to make that pitch.
Okay, so just real quick, we have heard two things tonight that are very, very important. Heard about the forest ordinance and preserving forests, and we have to save the wetlands. These, and all of it, everybody talked about, they're not perfect. It's a step in the right direction. And it's great that everybody's here and learned about it, but we have to turn learning about it into action in order to help get these things done. So we have some signups for those that want to specifically advocate for the forests. And then we're going to send out right after this some information about the wetlands that you will get. Specifically, our representatives from District 3 and 14. So the Alana Berry and Russ Huxtable and Claire Snyder Hall are all already on board with the bill. So we will be giving you information about Sussex County people that may need more information and to be more aware of why they should support SB 9. And then the information about the forest preservation, we have that coming up in front of County Council July 14th. So we'll be getting more information. We do have the sign-up sheet because what's really going to be important for that night, or for that day, excuse me, is to get people that are willing to attend that county council hearing and let them know in person that it's important that forests be preserved in Sussex County. So that's where we are. We've got some stuff. There's a sign-up sheet still out there for the forest stuff. And we will get an email out to all members tonight that has the email information specific to the wetlands bill. Thank you.
I should say SPC has officially, the board has officially voted to endorse SB 9. I believe it's the first time that our organization has specifically taken a position on a piece of state legislation. And so this kind of marks a turning point for the organization. And we are encouraging your advocacy in support of that bill as well. We ran a little bit long tonight. I apologize for those of you who are NHL fans who wanted to see the playoffs. There's still 2 periods, I'm sure. And, but thank you all very much for coming out. We've got some materials over on the side that Olivia has on display. And I'm confident that both Olivia and Mark will stick around a few minutes to answer any questions you might have. I want to especially thank Mark, who has to drive all the way back to Wilmington. So we appreciate your being down here tonight.